heard some very, very emotional comments from the residents, and we brought in many public officials and elected and appointed officials that we could get here to listen and try to recommit themselves to making sure we endure and we fight this thing to the end, and we stay focused and stay committed to making sure, one, that we try to bring back Viacon as best we can and try to promote fair resolution for the residents, but also commit to making sure that we try to save our environment, save Viacon as best we can, and try to recommit ourselves to that. But tonight is going to be, and at that meeting we didn't have any technical presentations. It was basically just to hear from the residents, and we had prayer from local clergy as well, and heard comments from the officials. Tonight's going to be a very scientific meeting or informational session. There's been, I understand, some reinterpretation of the seismic data. There's some recent discussion about what they find as far as gas accumulation in the pockets in the community and best ways to scientifically address those concerns. So it's going to be a long meeting, a lot of information, so we're going to ask everyone, if you can, to hold your questions to the end. They have a slide presentation. I think it ought to flow pretty quickly, but we have 44 slides with different information, so we ask everybody to kind of hold the questions, let Dr. Hecox and Don Marlin get through the information. Then obviously they'll take questions from the floor for maybe any further explanation anybody or the questions anybody may have. So at this time, without any further delay, let's call Dr. Hecox and we'll start the presentation. He'll call on Don Marlin when he's finished with his presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Tonight we've got 3 subjects. Don Marlin's going to talk first of all about the 3D seismic. Actually 4 subjects, I guess I can't count. Will Pettit's going to talk about the stability. Perry Franklin's going to give an update on the Blue Ribbon Commission and all the progress being made there. And then I'm going to give a situational update on some of the pertinent things that some of you may have heard Thursday night. I'm going to update those, but there's some other situational things you need to be aware of. So with that, I will turn it over to Don.
Well, good evening, everybody. I guess last time I saw you was about 2 months ago, and I was disappointed in my presentation because there was none. And I know you're probably disappointed in mine too because of their technical difficulties. But bottom line, came back here, and hopefully in about 15 minutes I'll be able to wrap your arms around what I see as far as my particular discipline in working with this incident. And I guess that kind of leads to kind of a joke, and I'm not going to start out with a joke, but I have to say that, you know, what really drives a petroleum geologist or petroleum geophysicist crazy is bring them into a public community like this and try to explain the subsurface without pictures. I mean, I know it takes a lot of money to keep the AC down in here, but I was flapping my arms like crazy last time. It was crazy. But, and so I'm thinking about that since. But bottom line, I'm going to go through a couple of slides here and hopefully cover all the aspects of what I see in the 3D seismic. And in the last 2 months, we've had a lot of new data come to my hands. And 2 in particular. One, we got a more competent set of 3D data from the 2007 Legend seismic data. And we also got a hold of the actual field records for this particular 3D acquisition that was taken back in March. And part of my duty here was to reprocess this data and basically define the integrity of Texas Brine's processing and acquisition. Yes, I know there was a question across the board. So we went to a third-party processor, a very well-known, world-renowned group of exploration and processing geophysicists that I've worked with in the past. And we took the data and basically went through a very methodical approach to reviewing all these field records again and reprocessing the data to determine that what Texas Brine's processing had good integrity or not. And I'm here to tell you that it does have good integrity, but going to this new geophysical processor allows us to get higher resolution data. They have a lot of patented products. They've got some of the best geophysicists that I know in the world that I got to consult with on this project, and we've reprocessed the data. And even though Texas Brine's data integrity and acquisition is good, I feel like we've got the best resolution that I could obtain out of this data set. So what I ended up doing in the last 2 months was basically starting at ground zero again. Because one, I wanted to go back with all of this new data out here and establish where the salt was. And we've got a lot of good control points for it. Primarily, we have all the historical wells, probably about 2, maybe 3 dozen wells. Have to tie that in with all of our vertical seismic profiles that were shot in this area from 2010 to early this year. Tie that with the new acquisition that Texas Brine acquired, and take all the reprocessing data and also the new Legend 2007 3D data and combine and integrate all of that information. So from January to today, we went from 1/3 of a square mile of unknown seismic and well control to a volume of data. So I stepped back and said, first, where's the salt? And as you can see on the screen, I'm just going to give you a caricature picture of this, and the rest of the slides basically show you what the profile of this salt looks like on the side. And primarily in the area that the salt is going to be represented in yellow and all the rest of the illustrations. And it's in the area of the salt dome that's to the east of the sinkhole. It's primarily about 700-foot flat tabletop. And when you go to the west in the area of the sinkhole, consider jumping off like a 7,000-foot cliff. It becomes vertical. And it has a little bit of cremulations on the side, but for the most part, it's a very vertical face, and it's difficult to image with such a small seismic acquisition of 2 square miles. Then my next step was basically to, once I identified the salt, was to look for disturbance outside of the salt. And how we end up doing that is the sedimentary layers on the left side of the green represent very, very continuous reflection events. And then the salt, once that's defined, becomes an interface that we can bound those reflectors on the left with the salt. So anything in between yellow and green, I can say that is my maximum interpretation of the disturbance area. If we didn't realize that there was hydraulic connection between the cavern and the sinkhole, I would say that that would be our maximum uncertainty of where the salt position is. So where the disturbance is between the green and the yellow boundaries. And that was my next step in doing the 6-step approach. Third, to understand the subsurface conditions more, I wanted to look at outside of the disturbance and understand the physical geology of the rock record from 0 to 7,000 feet. And that's important because we need to know what type of influence the layered rocks look like as we go down through the disturbance area down to the cavern depth. And then finally, once we've identified salt and disturbance and the subsurface conditions all the way down to the cavern depth, I need to look for hydrocarbons. And here is what I've looked for, is that once I see disturbance, the hydrocarbons that could be causing bubbling up to the surface, migration into the aquifer, migration into the lenses of sand in the aquitard, which bound the aquifer, any hydrocarbons that could come into the system, I believe, are adjacent to or within that green volume.
There's just a little confusion because of the background.
Okay.
The yellow line is a vertical profile, okay, on the western side of the salt. It's not related to the caverns you see here. The yellow line is a vertical profile, and the disturbed rock zone is green. Again, that's a vertical profile. So you're looking at the edge of the salt like this. You're
It's
looking
a side
at the western
profile.
side of the dome.
And it's a side schematic. I'm just trying to just illustrate what it would look like in a cartoon sense before I show them the real data.
Right.
Okay, sorry. Is that all clear to you? Hopefully, Gary will correct me if I don't get anything clear in the future. So I took the 6-step approach because I had to step back to the very beginning because I had all this data. Let me also kind of step back with the evolution of data over the last 9 months. And this goes into what we've actually talked about. I just talked about it a minute ago. When I first stepped into the project, we had a handful of wells that were built between 1920 and early 2000s. And I had to tie those rock records to basically one vertical seismic profile and a small subset of seismic that was obtained from the landowner. And in normal senses, I know it looks like a large scale on this map, but a third of a square mile of unknown seismic background and one vertical seismic profile with well control around here is not a whole lot to work with. So there wasn't a lot of definition, so there was a lot of possibilities out there. Moving to March, as you can see, there was a number of vertical seismic profiles or slices of the earth that Texas Brine had taken to further identify the salt interface in this area. Moving to April, they acquired 3D seismic. And with this, we went from poorer resolution to finer resolution. And this was the final pre-plot of where the actual receiver lines, which are the geophones, were laid out in blue, and the red were the source or energy points that we put into the ground. Some were along the bayou, which are air guns, some were vibrators, which are in the community, but the majority of this acquisition was the source or energy shot holes. And that's what we originally took a look at in April, and they delivered their process product in the 1st of April by the deadline that was demanded of them. And in July, late July, they finally acquired a full competent data set of the 2011 Legend data set, which is coarser in resolution. They have points of control, or what we call bins on the subsurface, on an 82.5 by 82.5 spacing. However, even though we got that full data set, it appears that to the right side of this red squiggly line, there was very few source and receivers, primarily probably because they did not have a permit to put a lot of their geophones or their source records onto the facilities that are present there today. That's an assumption of mine. I don't have the actual acquisition, so all I have is the data to work with. But it does look like we're limited in our shallow seismic record by the data that they purchased in July. And then finally, we moved to August, and that's the reprocessing data. We're now comparing 82.5 foot bin spacings to 37.5, which is very, very fine resolution. So that's the evolution of data. So that's why this interpretation has gone through its modification and tweaks over time, primarily because we've been getting this data trickling in over time, and it's going to modify our interpretation, or at least modified mine. So what's the result? The result on this map, this is a combination caprock and salt contour map. So we've taken all of these volumes of data, including the wells, the VSPs, the three-dimensional seismic profiles, and I put together my best interpretation of the salt in a contour form. And what you see on this map, you've got the well control points, which are green and red. These are historical wells drilled between like 1925 and 2001. You've got all of the seismic control, and you build all these things together, and the blue represents the distribution of the caprock. And the caprock is defined as a layer of anhydrite and other carbonate materials that's common on top of salt. And so its distribution is about 400 feet below the surface. It's almost tabletop, and where it becomes red, it starts to go over the edge of the salt dome. And that's usually where the sheath or the thick caprock starts or stops. The contours, as you can see, are from salt. And the salt is about 700 feet below the surface, all the way in the area to the east of the blue. And then you drop off on that cliff. And that's where the contours get steep. And that's what we're trying to image. Where the two caverns are that are on this map for just reference, this is the Oxy 1 maximum area as it's projected to the surface. This is the Oxy 3 area. And in pink, this is where our new 3,000-foot geophone well was drilled in between those two.